Kwame was 40 years old, with a net worth of $180 million, and he was flying at an altitude of 41,000 feet, inside a metallic tube that cost more than the entire gross domestic product of a small island nation. His Gulfstream G650, a $65 million marvel of aerospace engineering, sliced through the twilight sky, its twin Rolls-Royce engines humming a quiet song of immense power. Below him, the patchwork of America scrolled by, a landscape of towns and farms he had once only dreamed of seeing from a commercial airliner window. Now, he owned the window and the sky it looked out upon, but the devastation wasn't below him. It was waiting for him. It had a name, a time, and a place. It was a party, a celebration. His wife Zora was throwing a party to celebrate their divorce, and she had invited 200 of Dallas's most influential people to witness his public execution. He pulled his phone, a simple iPhone 13, in a worn $40 leather case, from the pocket of his $200 Loro Piana cashmere joggers. He didn't need the latest model. He didn't care about the conspicuous consumption that had become his wife's native language. He opened the message he'd received a week ago, not from Zora, but forwarded from a mutual acquaintance who felt a pang of what might have been pity. The image was a digital invitation designed in rose gold and black calligraphy. Join Zora Adebayo in celebrating her newfound freedom. A new chapter begins. Let's toast to independence and the future. Saturday, October 21st, 7 p.m. The Rosewood Mansion on Turtle Creek. Cocktails and liberation. Liberation. The word was a scalpel, intended to cut him cleanly and deeply. She hadn't even waited for a judge's signature. In her mind, the marriage was over, and all that remained was the triumphant division of spoils. Her spoils, his fortune. He had built Kingfisher Capital from a cramped office space above a laundromat in DeSoto, with a second-hand Dell laptop and a $50,000 loan from a mentor who believed in him. Over 15 years, he had turned that belief into a private equity behemoth with a portfolio of mid-market companies worth nearly $1 billion. His stake was the $180 million, and Zora, his wife of 8 years, believed half of that was about to become her liberation fund. He had no idea how wrong she was. Have you ever felt the world shift under your feet, knowing a storm is coming that only you can see? Share your story in the comments below, because the calm before the strike is a silence few people understand. The flight attendant, a discreet professional named Helen, appeared at his elbow. "Mr. Adebayo, we are beginning our descent into Dallas Love Field. We should be on the ground in approximately 17 minutes at 6:43 p.m. as scheduled. Can I get you anything?" Kwame looked up from the phone, his face a calm mask. His deep brown skin was luminous under the soft, recessed lighting of the jet's cabin. "No, thank you, Helen. I'm fine." He felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just a profound, still clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when a complex equation is finally solved, and all the variables have settled into a simple, elegant answer. Zora had made a critical mistake, and tonight he was simply going to deliver the result. Their life together had been a carefully curated facade of domestic normalcy, housed within a sprawling 12,000 square foot estate in Highland Park. The home, a $12.5 million limestone monument to modern architecture, was Zora's canvas, and she painted it with his money. Kwame remembered a Saturday morning last spring. He was in the kitchen, a cavernous space with 2 marble islands and a $22,000 La Cornue range he had never once seen her use. He was making coffee, using a simple $35 pour-over cone, grinding beans he'd bought from a local roaster in the Bishop Arts District for $18 a bag. He wore a faded Howard University sweatshirt, a relic from a life of struggle and ambition she could never comprehend. Zora swept into the room, a whirlwind of silk and fragrance. She was wearing a $1,800 La Perla robe and carrying a brand-new Hermes Birkin bag, a hideous mustard yellow thing that looked like a block of cheese, with a handle. "It just arrived," she announced, placing it on the marble island with a theatrical thud. "It's the Togo leather in John de Naples. An investment, really, only $1,400. Kwame looked from the bag to his $89 Timex Weekender watch on his wrist. "An investment in what?" he asked, his voice quiet. "In happiness, darling," she said, not looking at him, but at her own reflection in the polished chrome of the Sub-Zero refrigerator. "In projecting the right image. We are who people think we are." She ran a manicured finger over the bag's golden hardware. He had no idea what was coming, but the rot had already set in. Another time, they hosted a dinner party for a dozen people. The guest list was a who's who of Dallas finance and society, men who managed billions, and women whose primary occupation was spending the profits. The catering bill alone was $8,000. The flowers, flown in from Holland, were another $5,000. Zora was in her element, wearing a $200 Valentino gown, her laughter echoing through the high-ceiling dining room. A guest, a real estate developer named Charles, was praising Kwame's latest acquisition, a struggling manufacturing firm in the Midwest he planned to turn around. "Kwame, you have the Midas touch," Charles boomed, raising his glass of 400 a bottle Screaming Eagle Cabernet. Zora, seated at the head of the table, let out a delicate, dismissive laugh. "Oh, Kwame is relentless," she said, the word landing like a stone in a quiet pond. "It's that chip on his shoulder. He grew up with nothing, you see. He's still trying to prove he belongs at the table." The table went silent. The other guests shifted uncomfortably. Kwame felt the blood drain from his face, but he kept his expression neutral. He looked at his wife, this beautiful black woman whose skin glowed under the light of their $30,000 crystal chandelier, and he saw a stranger. A cruel stranger who saw his past not as a source of strength, but as a social handicap, a story to be polished and presented for her own aggrandizement. He had built this entire world for them, for her, and she was using its gilded walls to hold him prisoner. He picked up his wine glass, the stem cool against his fingers, and simply said, "To humble beginnings." The toast was a quiet promise to himself. He would never forget where he came from. And soon, he would have to remind her too. The betrayal didn't happen all at once. It was a slow erosion, a series of 1,000 small cruelties that wore away the foundation of their marriage. It began with her contempt for his work. He lived for the art of the deal, the intellectual challenge of finding value where others saw none. He would spend weeks buried in financial statements and market analysis, his mind a complex engine of numbers and strategy. To Zora, his work was just the tedious process that funded her lifestyle. One evening, he came home late, around 9 p.m., after closing a difficult deal worth over $50 million. He was exhausted, but exhilarated. He walked into their master suite, a room the size of a small apartment, with a price tag to match. The custom bed was $40,000. The fret linens were $3,500 a set. Zora was propped up against a mountain of pillows, scrolling through her iPad. She was looking at pictures from a charity gala she'd attended without him. "We closed the Aerotech deal," he said, loosening his tie. "Oh, that's nice," she replied, her eyes not leaving the screen. She was looking at a photo of herself with another woman, both of them draped in diamonds. "Did you see Camilla's necklace? Harry Winston, at least $300,000? She said Charles bought it for her just because it was Tuesday." She sighed dramatically. Imagine. He stood there, the thrill of his victory dissolving into a familiar, bitter ash. His work, his passion, was reduced to a simple commodity, and it was always found wanting when weighed against someone else's jewelry. "I worked on this for 6 months, Zora." "And I'm sure the money will be lovely," she said, finally looking at him. Her eyes were cold. But honestly, Kwame, your obsession with work is so predictable. It's all you have. Don't you ever want to just live? Her definition of living was a constant performance. It was lunches at the Mansion restaurant, shopping sprees at Highland Park Village, and weekends in Aspen or St. Bart's. It was a life documented for Instagram, each photo a carefully composed testament to their wealth. His definition of living was building something that would last, something with meaning. He thought they were building it together. He was beginning to realize he was just building it for her. The insults grew more direct. In arguments about her spending, a $75,000 charge on the Amex Centurion card for a single week in Paris with her friends, a $45,000 redecoration of a guest bathroom that was already perfect, she would resort to a familiar, brutal tactic. Without me, you'd still be that awkward boy from Oak Cliff trying to impress people, she spat at him during one fight. I gave you class. I made you presentable. Don't you ever forget that you married up. He never raised his voice. He would just stand there, absorbing the blows, his mind quietly cataloging each one. Each cruel word, each dismissive gesture was a piece of data. And Kwame Adebayo was better at analyzing data than anyone. The most painful cut came during a conversation about the future. He had brought up the idea of starting a foundation, of endowing scholarships at Paul Quinn College, a small HBCU in Dallas that was doing incredible work. It was a legacy he wanted to build. Zora had scoffed, literally scoffed. A foundation? How quaint. Darling, charity is what you do when you're old and bored. We should be buying a chalet in Gstaad, not propping up some failing little college. It's not failing, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. It's giving kids like me a chance. And that's the problem, isn't it? She said, walking over to her vanity, a $15,000 antique. She picked up a diamond bracelet, a $120,000 gift he'd given her for their last anniversary. You're still trying to save the boy you were. I'm trying to build a life for the man you're supposed to be. She looked at his reflection in the mirror, her expression a mixture of pity and disgust. That was the moment he knew. It wasn't just a troubled marriage, it was a hostile takeover, and he was the target asset. The headquarters of Kingfisher Capital occupied the top 2 floors of a gleaming glass tower on McKinney Avenue in uptown Dallas. From his corner office, Kwame could see the entire city spread out below him, a kingdom of commerce and concrete. It was a view he had earned. The glass walls were meant to signify transparency, but today they felt like a fortress, sealing him away from the emotional chaos Zora was creating. His lawyer, Marcus Hayes, sat across from him at a massive mahogany conference table. Marcus was a decade older than Kwame, a shrewd, silver-haired black man who had been the top corporate lawyer in Dallas for 20 years. He wore a bespoke Brioni suit that probably cost $10,000 and spoke in calm, measured tones that could dissect a billion-dollar contract or soothe a panicked CEO. He and Kwame had been friends long before they were client and counsel. She signed it, Marcus said, sliding a thin, leather-bound document across the table. The document was titled Post-Nuptial Agreement Clarifying Premarital Assets. 6 weeks ago, signed, dated, and notarized. It's ironclad. Kwame picked it up. His hands were steady. He remembered the day he'd presented it to Zora. It was part of a larger estate planning package Marcus had drawn up. Wills, trusts, powers of attorney, a responsible, boring pile of paperwork for a wealthy couple to sign. Buried deep within the stack was the 2-page clarification. It was simple. It stipulated that all assets owned by Kwame Adebayo prior to the marriage, specifically his entire stake in Kingfisher Capital and all its subsequent growth, were to remain his sole and separate property. You told her it was just an update for tax purposes, Kwame recalled. I told her it was a comprehensive review of your estate to optimize tax efficiency and liability protection, Marcus corrected with a slight smile, which was true. This document protects the primary asset Kingfisher from any potential marital claim, which is a key component of long-term liability protection. I just didn't specify whose liability. Zora, who considered any document longer than a dinner menu to be an insufferable bore, had barely glanced at it. She had flipped to the last page, signed her elegant flowing signature with a $900 Mont Blanc pen he had bought her, and pushed the stack back across the desk in their home office. All done, she had chirped, already thinking about the new collection at Neiman Marcus. Now, can we please talk about something more interesting? I'm thinking of having the pool resurfaced in Italian glass tile. The tile would have cost $150,000. Kwame looked at Marcus. So, Kingfisher Capital, valued at my stake of $180 million, is completely off the table. As if it never existed, Marcus confirmed. Her claim is limited to half of the assets acquired during the marriage. The Highland Park house has a mortgage, so the equity is about $4 million. The art, the cars, the joint bank accounts. After liquidating and splitting everything, her share will be... Marcus consulted a file. Approximately $3.2 million. $3.2 million. It was a vast sum of money to most of the world. To Zora, who spent nearly that much in a single year, it was a death sentence. Her lawyers, who she had surely already consulted, would be advising her that she was entitled to half of everything, half of the growth of Kingfisher during their 8-year marriage. They would be quoting her a figure somewhere north of $90 million. They would be wrong. They didn't know about the document she had signed 6 weeks ago. She's planning this party, Kwame said, looking out the window at the distant shimmer of traffic. This liberation party. She thinks she's about to walk away with a fortune. Arrogance is a blindfold, Marcus said, leaning back in his chair. She underestimated you, Kwame. She saw the quiet man from Oak Cliff, not the kingfisher, a bird that looks small and quiet until it strikes. And it never misses. Marcus leaned forward. So what's the plan? We file the decree on Monday morning with this agreement attached. But what about tonight? Kwame was silent for a long moment. The strategy was forming in his mind, clean and precise. It wouldn't be a loud, messy confrontation. It would be a quiet, devastating act of financial and social justice. Tonight, Kwame said, his voice barely above a whisper, I'm going to deliver a copy. The 6 weeks that followed the signing of that document were the longest of Kwame's life. He was living inside a pressure cooker, feigning ignorance while his world was being systematically dismantled by the woman sleeping next to him in their $40,000 bed. He had to act normal. He had to be the same predictable, work-obsessed husband she despised, all while knowing he held a signed confession to her own financial demise. Each day was a masterclass in strategic restraint. One afternoon, he was working in his home study when he heard Zora in the adjacent living room, her voice bright and brittle on the phone with her party planner. The door was open just enough. It was a deliberate act of cruelty. No, Patrice, not Veuve Clicquot, Zora said, her voice dripping with condescension. This isn't a Sweet 16. I want Dom Perignon, the 2012 vintage, at least 10 cases, and an ice luge, a big one, carved into a phoenix rising from the ashes. A bit on the nose, I know, but the symbolism is just too perfect. Kwame didn't look up from his laptop. He was analyzing a balance sheet for a potential acquisition, his mind tracing the flow of capital, liabilities, and assets. He heard her laugh, a sharp, metallic sound. The budget? Darling, please. The budget is whatever it takes. My settlement will be significant. Let's just say this party is a rounding error. He typed a note in the margin of a spreadsheet. Increase debt facility by 10 meters. He felt a cold calm settle over him. She was planning her victory party on the deck of a sinking ship, and she had no idea the ocean was just inches away. A week later, the performance was for his benefit alone. He came into the kitchen to find a catalog from Cartier left open on the counter. A page featuring a high jewelry necklace was dog-eared. The piece was a cascade of diamonds and emeralds, a serpent of obscene wealth. Its price, listed in tiny font at the bottom, was $250,000. Zora was standing by the espresso machine, pretending to be busy. "Morning," he said, moving past her to get the coffee. "Morning," she replied, a little too brightly. "I was just doing some window shopping. A girl can dream, can't she?" She gestured vaguely at the catalog. "A little something to celebrate my new beginning. A gift to myself from my new, independent life." It was a test, a provocation. She wanted him to ask, to argue, to show his hand. She wanted him to see the price tag and flinch, giving her another piece of evidence for her narrative of the controlling, stingy husband. Kwame just nodded, measured out his coffee grounds into the paper filter, and began the slow, circular pour of hot water. He didn't acknowledge the catalog. He didn't acknowledge the $250,000 threat lying on his kitchen counter. He finished making his coffee, poured it into his simple $15 ceramic mug, and said, "Have a good day." He walked out of the room, leaving her standing in a cloud of impotent fury and expensive perfume. His silence was driving her mad, and her madness was making her reckless. She had no idea what she'd already lost. The world is full of people who mistake silence for weakness. Have you ever had to stay quiet and play dumb while planning your next move? Tell us about the moment you knew you had to wait for the perfect time to act. The small daily cruelties escalated, each one a fresh layer of kindling on the pyre she was unknowingly building for herself. She was testing his limits, pushing him, trying to provoke a reaction that would fit the story she was telling her friends, her lawyers, and herself. The story of a victim escaping a tyrant. One evening, Kwame overheard her on the phone with her best friend, a woman named Alana, whose husband ran a competing private equity firm. They were in the master closet, a 2-story affair with a spiral staircase and boutique-style lighting. Zora thought he was still at the office. "He just wanders around this big house like a ghost," Zora was saying, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "He has no idea what's coming. My lawyer, Jeffrey, says we should expect a settlement of at least $90 million. 90. Can you imagine, Lana? I'll be free. I'll buy a place in Malibu, maybe a penthouse in New York. I'll finally be able to breathe." There was a pause. Kwame could imagine Alana on the other end, her mind racing, calculating the social implications. "He's just so dull," Zora continued, the venom in her voice palpable. "All he cares about is his work, his deals. He has no soul. I'll be living my best life on his dime. And honestly, he deserves it. For being so boring." Kwame stood in the hallway, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He deserves it. He turned and walked silently back to his study, the words echoing in his mind. This wasn't about a broken marriage anymore. This was about a fundamental disrespect for the man he was, for the journey he had taken. She didn't just want his money. She wanted to erase the story of how he had earned it. The final, and perhaps most personal insult came a few days before the party. He came home to find a cardboard box by the front door, marked Donations. Inside, nestled among some old clothes, was a small, worn collection of books. They were his college paperbacks, W.E.B. Du Bois's The Souls of Black Folk, James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. The books that had shaped him, that had forged his intellect and his identity as a young black man full of fire and ambition. The pages were dog-eared, the margins filled with his own youthful scribbles. They were worthless in terms of money, but priceless to him. He found Zora directing a pair of movers in the formal living room, where she was replacing a perfectly fine $12,000 sofa with a new, ostentatious $28,000 Roche-Beaubois creation. "What's this?" he asked, his voice flat, holding up the box. She glanced at it, then back at the movers. "Oh, that? Just some old clutter from the library. Making space. Everything needs to be fresh, clean, a new start. These were my books, Zora, from college." She finally turned to face him, an exasperated look on her face. "Kwame? They're just old paperbacks. They're dusty. They don't match the new decor. Let them go. It's time to move on from all that." All that. His history, his intellectual heritage, his very identity, reduced to clutter that didn't match her aesthetic. He looked at her, standing there in her $1,400 Balenciaga sneakers, directing the placement of a sofa that cost more than his entire 4 years of college tuition, and he felt a profound and final disconnect. He picked up the box, took it to his car, and placed it gently in the trunk. He would not let her throw his soul away. He was done playing dumb. It was time for the Kingfisher to fly. At 6:43 p.m., the 26-ton Gulfstream G650 kissed the runway at Dallas Love Field with a grace that defied its size. The landing was almost imperceptible, a testament to the skill of the pilots and the perfection of the machine. Kwame felt the slight rumble through the floor of the cabin as the spoilers deployed and the engines reversed their thrust with a deep, powerful roar. Outside the custom-designed oval windows, the familiar landscape of his city rushed by. The hangars of Southwest Airlines, the distant glimmer of the downtown skyline catching the last rays of a fiery Texas sunset. The rain that had been forecast had held off, leaving the air washed clean and the light sharp and clear. The jet taxied smoothly toward the private aviation terminal, a separate, serene world away from the commercial chaos. Before the engines had fully spooled down, a black door on a discreet building slid open, and a motorcade of 3 identical black Cadillac Escalades rolled onto the tarmac, their tinted windows reflecting the dying sun. Each vehicle was a top-of-the-line ESV model, costing over $110,000, and was driven by a member of Kwame's security and logistics team, all former military, all fiercely loyal. As the jet's door opened and the stairs lowered, the first Escalade pulled up perfectly to the bottom step. The driver, a man named David, who had been with Kwame for 15 years, got out and opened the rear passenger door. He was a quiet, imposing man who had seen Kwame at his most stressed and his most triumphant. He knew something was different tonight. There was an edge to the silence, a weight in the air. Kwame descended the stairs, carrying only a slim leather briefcase. He had changed during the flight from his comfortable travel clothes into a suit. It wasn't flashy. It was a custom Tom Ford single-breasted suit in a dark charcoal wool, tailored to perfection. It was a $7,800 statement of quiet, unassailable power. He wore it with a simple white shirt and no tie. It was armor. He slid into the back of the Escalade. The door closed with a solid, satisfying thud, sealing him in a cocoon of black leather and silence. "Evening, David," he said. "Evening, Mr. Adebayo," David replied, his eyes meeting Kwame's in the rearview mirror for a brief moment. "The mansion, as planned." "As planned," Kwame confirmed. The motorcade pulled away from the jet and moved swiftly toward the exit of the airfield. They merged onto the Dallas North Tollway, heading south. They passed the familiar landmarks of his life, the exit for Royal Lane, near where he'd bought his first modest condo, the glittering towers of Preston Center, where he'd signed the lease for his first real office, and finally, the lush, tree-lined streets of Highland Park, where the house he would soon no longer call home stood silent and dark. He felt a pang of something. Not sadness, but nostalgia for the dream that house had once represented. A dream of partnership, of shared success. A dream that had turned into a nightmare of gilded cages and profound loneliness. They turned onto Turtle Creek Boulevard. The street was lined with valet stands and the gleaming bodies of expensive cars. Porsches, Bentleys, Rolls-Royces. The Rosewood Mansion, a palatial estate built in the 1920s and now one of the city's most exclusive hotels, was ablaze with light, music, and the sound of 200 voices laughing and drinking spilled out into the warm October night. David pulled the Escalade to a stop directly in front of the grand portico, bypassing the valet line. The other two Escalades flanked them, a silent, imposing guard. For a moment, Kwame just sat there, listening to the sound of the party. Zora's party, the celebration of his demise. He took a single deep breath, reached into his briefcase, and pulled out a single folded document. It was time. The clock on the dashboard of the Escalade read 7:02 p.m. From the moment Kwame stepped out of the vehicle, a bubble of silence seemed to expand around him. The valets, accustomed to a certain type of clientele, froze for a second, unsure of how to react to this quiet man who had arrived in a 3-car motorcade and simply walked past them as if they didn't exist. The doormen, recognizing him instantly, opened the heavy oak doors without a word, their professional smiles faltering. He stepped into the lobby. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and hothouse flowers. To his right, through a set of grand archways, the party was in full swing. The hotel's promenade ballroom was packed. A jazz trio was playing something upbeat and forgettable in the corner. Waitstaff circulated with trays of champagne and elaborate canapes. And everywhere, there were people. The people who ran Dallas, bankers, lawyers, surgeons, oil barons, and their impeccably dressed spouses. They were Zora's people now. Kwame's eyes scanned the room, a quick, dispassionate sweep. He saw Zora immediately. She was holding court near the massive stone fireplace, a glass of Dom Perignon in her hand, her laughter loud and performative. She was wearing a shimmering gold dress, a $12,000 creation by Balmain that caught the light and drew every eye in the room. She was telling a story, her hands gesturing wildly, her audience rapt. She looked radiant, triumphant. She hadn't seen him yet. He didn't walk toward her. His gaze shifted, landing on a figure standing near the long, polished bar. It was Zora's mother, Dahlia. Dahlia was a woman of immense pride and dignity, a retired professor of literature whose quiet elegance stood in stark contrast to her daughter's frantic glamour. She wore a simple but beautiful navy blue dress, her graying hair styled in an elegant updo. She held a glass of white wine and watched the proceedings with a complex expression, a mixture of maternal pride and something else, something that looked like concern. She had always been kind to Kwame, in her reserved way. He respected her, and that made her the perfect vector for the message he was about to deliver. He began to walk. He moved through the crowd, not with aggression, but with a calm, gravitational certainty that parted the sea of bodies before him. People turned as he passed. A murmur started at the edge of the room and spread inward like a ripple. Is that Kwame? What is he doing here? The volume of the room began to drop, the cacophony of 200 conversations fading into a confused buzz. He kept his eyes fixed on Dahlia. He was 20 feet away, 10 feet. Zora, sensing the shift in the room's energy, finally turned from her circle of admirers. Her smile froze on her face. Her eyes widened, first in shock, then in a flicker of anger, then in triumph. She thought he had come to beg, to make a scene, to give her the dramatic climax her party required. She was wrong. Kwame reached Dahlia. He stopped in front of her and gave a slight, respectful nod. He didn't say a word. The jazz trio, sensing the mood, faltered, and then stopped playing altogether. The silence in the room was now absolute. 200 pairs of eyes were locked on the two of them. From the inside pocket of his Tom Ford suit, Kwame withdrew the folded document. It was a single sheet of paper, a copy of the settlement agreement. The real one was with Marcus, ready to be filed at 8 a.m. on Monday. This was just the notice of termination. He held it out to Dahlia, not to Zora, to her mother. Dahlia looked from Quam's impassive face to the paper, then back again. Her hand, trembling slightly, rose to take it. Her fingers brushed his. It was the only physical contact in the entire exchange. In that moment, 1,000 unspoken words passed between them: regret, apology, respect. "Kwame, what is the meaning of this?" Zora's voice, sharp and furious, shattered the silence. She began to push her way through the crowd toward them. But Kwame didn't look at her. His transaction was complete. He gave Dahlia one last nod, turned with the same unhurried grace he had entered with, and walked out of the ballroom. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could feel the entire social structure of Zora's world collapsing into the vacuum of his departure. The strike was over. It had been silent, precise, and utterly devastating. The consequences cascaded almost immediately. As Kwame's Escalade pulled away from the Rosewood mansion, his phone, which had been silent, buzzed once. It was a text from Marcus. "It is done." Kwame had given him the authorization to execute the next phase of the plan the moment he left the party. The financial decapitation was as swift and silent as the social one. Back in the ballroom, chaos erupted. Dahlia, a woman of sharp intellect, unfolded the paper. She didn't need to be a lawyer to understand the words sole and separate property, or to recognize her daughter's signature at the bottom. She saw the proposed settlement figure, $3.2 million. Her face went white. Zora snatched the paper from her mother's hand, her eyes scanning it wildly. "This is a joke!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "This is a lie!" She looked around for support, but the faces of her friends were a mixture of shock, pity, and a dawning, horrified understanding. The party was over. Guests began to melt away, murmuring excuses, desperate to escape the blast radius of a public humiliation so profound it was almost radioactive. The next morning, a Sunday, the first real blow landed. Zora tried to pay for a lavish survivor's brunch with her remaining friends at the French Room. Her Amex Centurion card, with its $100,000 limit and mythical status, was declined. The waiter returned, his face a mask of embarrassment. "I'm sorry, madame. There seems to be a problem with the card." Zora, furious and humiliated, tried another card, declined, and another, declined. Kwame's instructions to Marcus had been clear. By 8 a.m. Sunday, terminate all joint credit facilities. On Monday morning, an email arrived from the dealership in the Design District. It was a formal notice that the lease on her 2023 Maserati Grand Cabrio, a $160,000 convertible she adored, was being terminated. The car, legally owned by a holding company controlled by Kwame, was to be retrieved by the end of the day. Tuesday brought the cruelest cut. A courier delivered a legal notice to the Highland Park estate. It was a formal notice to vacate the property within 30 days. The house, her palace, the very symbol of her status, was being taken away. The $12.5 million limestone monument was, like Kingfisher, Kwame's premarital property. She had 30 days to find an apartment. Her social circle, built on the currency of access and wealth, evaporated. Alana, her supposed best friend, stopped returning her calls. Her husband's firm did business with Kingfisher Capital. They couldn't afford to be on the wrong side of Kwame Adebayo. Charles, the real estate developer, suddenly became unavailable for lunch. The invitations to galas and charity boards, which had once flooded her inbox, stopped completely. She had built her identity on being Mrs. Adebayo. Without the name, and more importantly, without the money, she was nobody. She was just Zora, a woman with a few $1,000,000 in a city where that barely bought you a seat at the table. She had celebrated her freedom, and now she was truly free, free from the wealth, the status, and the power she had taken for granted. She was liberated into obscurity. The voicemails began on Saturday night, just minutes after he left the party. They were a real-time record of Zora's emotional collapse. Kwame didn't listen to them immediately. He had David drive him to his downtown penthouse, a property Zora didn't know he owned, and sat in the dark, looking out at the city lights. Later, he listened to them all, one after another, a clinical study in the stages of grief for a life she had just lost. Voicemail 1, 10:47 p.m., anger. Kwame, what in the hell was that? You think you can walk in and humiliate me? In front of my mother, my friends? You are going to regret this. My lawyer will tear you apart. You pathetic little man. You have no idea who you're dealing with. The voice was shrill, laced with the bravado of someone who still believed they held winning cards. Voicemail 2, Sunday 1:15 p.m. Denial. I just got off the phone with Jeffrey. He said that little piece of paper you waved around is meaningless. It won't hold up in court. Duress, coercion, he used a lot of big words. You can't do this, Kwame. The courts will give me what I'm owed. You can't just cut off my cards. Turn them back on, now. The anger was still there, but it was underpinned by a new, thin wire of panic. Voicemail 3, Monday 4:30 p.m. bargaining. Kwame, please, call me back. We can talk about this. The party was stupid, okay? I was hurt. I was trying to lash out. I didn't mean it. We can go to counseling. We can work this out. Just, please talk to me. The man from the Maserati dealership was here. He took the car. He took my car, Kwame. Her voice was softer now, the arrogance replaced by a pleading tone. Voicemail 4, Tuesday 11 a.m. Fear. They're making me leave the house. I got a letter. 30 days. Where am I supposed to go in 30 days? Kwame, this is our home. You can't just kick me out of our home. Please, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. Just don't do this. The words were rushed, tumbling over each other in a torrent of raw fear. Voicemail 5, Wednesday 2:17 a.m. Breakdown. This one was barely coherent. It was just the sound of sobbing. Deep, ragged, soul-wrenching sobs. The sound of a world completely and irrevocably shattered. Through the tears, a single, whispered phrase repeated over and over. I have nothing. I have nothing. You left me with nothing. Kwame saved the voicemails, not as trophies, but as a reminder. A reminder that pride is the most expensive luxury, and that when you build your house on someone else's foundation, you should never, ever try to set it on fire. 1 year later, the Texas sun was bright and warm on a crisp Saturday morning. Kwame was at White Rock Lake, the sprawling urban oasis in the heart of Dallas. He was finishing the last mile of a 6-mile run, his breathing even, his legs strong. He wore a simple pair of $80 running shorts and a t-shirt from a 10K race he'd run a few months back. He was leaner than he'd been a year ago. The stress and excess of his old life sweated out on countless miles of this very trail. The quiet rhythm of his feet on the pavement was a form of meditation, a way of marking time, of moving forward. He slowed to a walk near the picnic tables at Winfrey Point, where a small group of people was waiting for him. They were the inaugural class of the Kingfisher HBCU Founders Scholarship. 5 bright, ambitious students from Dallas area high schools, all headed to historically black colleges and universities in the fall, their tuition, room, and board completely covered for all 4 years. The program had cost his foundation $1.2 million in its first year, the best money he had ever spent. A young woman named Amara, who was headed to Spelman to study economics, stepped forward. Her deep brown skin glowed in the morning light, and her eyes were bright with an intelligence and determination that reminded Kwame of himself at that age. "Mr. Adebayo," she said, her voice a little shy but clear, "we just wanted to thank you. You've changed our lives." "You've changed your own lives?" he corrected gently. "I just moved some numbers around." "You did the work." Amara smiled. "My little sister, Kemi, she drew something for you." She handed him a piece of construction paper, folded in half. He opened it. It was a child's drawing, rendered in the bold, earnest strokes of a brown crayon. It depicted two figures. One was a tall man with a big smile, labeled Mr. Kwame. The other was a smaller figure, a girl with her hair in two large puffs, labeled Me. They were standing in front of a big square building with the word college written above the door. A huge yellow sun with beaming rays filled the corner of the page. It was simple. It was pure. It was the most beautiful work of art he had ever seen. He felt a tightness in his throat. This was wealth. Not the cold, hard number in a bank account, but this connection, this hope. The ability to build a foundation for someone else, to give them a chance to build their own sky. As he drove home, not to the cold mausoleum in Highland Park, but to a comfortable, lived-in house in a quieter neighborhood, he thought about Zora. He had heard through the grapevine that she had moved to Houston, was living in a rented condo, and was trying to rebrand herself as a lifestyle consultant. He wished her no ill will. Forgiveness, he had learned, wasn't about absolving the other person. It was about freeing yourself. You forgive for your own peace. He had found his. He had learned that a person's character isn't defined by the heights they reach, but by the ground they stand on. True wealth isn't what you accumulate for yourself. It's what you build for others. It's not about the parties you throw, but the doors you open. It's not about the price of your suit, but the strength of your soul. His jet still flew, his company still thrived, but he was no longer a passenger in his own life. He was finally and fully the pilot. What does true wealth mean to you? Is it found in a bank account or in the community you build and the lives you touch? Let us know your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to Love Beyond Pride for more stories about finding strength in the face of betrayal.